This morning, CIA Director John Ratcliffe said the U.S. is pausing intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The Trump administration had already announced a pause in military aid to Ukraine, even as shipments of weapons and equipment were actively en route.
What if Ukraine's biggest enemy isn't just Russia? The U.S. just cut off $1 billion in military aid, leaving Ukraine's army scrambling. No more missiles, no more tanks, no more air defense. Troops are deserting in record numbers, 60,000 gone in just 10 months. Exhausted, outgunned, and running out of time. Can Ukraine survive this? Now, firstly, you might be wondering, why did the U.S. do this? It all started with one disastrous Oval Office meeting. Zelensky walked in expecting support. Instead, Trump lit him up, told him he was gambling with World War III. Told him he'd be gone soon if he didn't agree to America's version of a peace deal with Russia. No debate, no options. Just do it, or lose everything. Zelensky pushed back. He wanted guarantees, security, a real plan. Trump didn't care. The meeting spiraled into a shouting match. Then Zelensky was told to leave. The White House deal for minerals and security, dead. And within hours, the military aid stopped cold. This isn't just a pause. Ukraine's entire war strategy is wrecked. No more missiles to hit Russian supply lines. No more Patriot air defense systems to stop drone attacks. The HIMARS launchers that helped push back Russian forces? Done. Even the 31 Abrams tanks Ukraine had been waiting for? Not happening. Troops on the front line are already low on ammo, low on food, and losing ground. Morale is in the gutter. Soldiers are deserting in record numbers. Some are refusing to fight with empty weapons and no reinforcements. The 123rd Brigade already walked off the battlefield in Vuhledar, and more could follow. Meanwhile, Russia is watching and waiting. Ukraine's forces are weaker than ever, and Putin knows it. If Europe can't step in fast, Ukraine risks losing this war completely. And that's exactly what Trump is betting on. He's forcing Ukraine into a corner, pushing Zelensky toward a deal he doesn't want. One that could mean giving up land, military power, or even Ukraine's future in NATO. Meanwhile, things on the ground are falling apart, and Ukraine's military is barely holding on. What started as a few desertions here and there has turned into a full-blown crisis. If it keeps up, Ukraine's defenses might crumble way sooner than anyone expects. Over 60,000 soldiers have already ditched the fight in just 10 months, more than double the number in the last 2 years combined. If that doesn't scream trouble, nothing does. Some took medical leave and never came back. Others got orders they didn't agree with and simply refused to fight. Entire units have walked off the battlefield, exposing Ukraine's defensive lines. Over 100,000 soldiers have been charged with desertion since 2022, and in the past year alone, nearly half of them have gone missing. The real number? Likely much worse. Some officials believe up to 200,000 troops have abandoned their posts. The impact? Devastating. Ukraine held on to Vuhledar for 2 years, but when soldiers deserted, Russia took it in weeks. The 72nd Brigade was stretched so thin that some battalions went from having 120 soldiers to barely 10. Then when backup arrived, those reinforcements abandoned the fight too. With entire positions left empty, Russian forces marched in and wiped out retreating Ukrainian troops. For the ones still fighting, morale has hit rock bottom. Soldiers are sitting under relentless artillery fire with barely any ammo to fight back. One soldier described watching his unit get blown apart while commanders radioed in with empty words, telling them to stay strong and hold the line. Meanwhile, fresh recruits, many forced into service, are sent straight to the battlefield, barely trained, completely unequipped, and walking into battles they never stood a chance of winning. Ukraine's government knows things are falling apart and is scrambling for solutions. They're offering deserters a deal. Come back, and all charges will be dropped, but even that isn't enough. Lowering the draft age to 18? That's not stopping young men from dodging conscription. Over 650,000 have already fled the country to avoid being thrown into the fight. And they're not alone. Ukrainian troops sent abroad for training are quietly vanishing. Military camps in Poland have seen soldiers disappearing instead of returning to the front lines. Back home, men are hiding to avoid being sent back to a war they believe is already lost. Even Ukraine's desperate recruitment tactics aren't working. Reports of officers grabbing young men off the streets are spreading, but the military is still running out of people. With Ukraine's army falling apart, Russia is wasting no time. Since summer, Russian forces have made their biggest advances in years, seizing land faster than ever. Their drones are getting smarter, their electronic warfare is jamming Ukrainian signals, and their troops are being replaced faster than Ukraine can even train new recruits. In just a few months, Russia has taken more territory than it did in all of 2023, and every inch Ukraine loses is nearly impossible to win back. By the time Western tanks, missiles, or artillery arrive, Russia has already figured out how to counter them. HIMARS launchers were unstoppable at first. Now Russian forces have adapted. Ukrainian drones used to strike deep into Russian territory. Now they're being jammed before they even get close. Every new weapon that Ukraine gets is only useful for a short time before Russia finds a way to neutralize it. And while Ukraine waits, Russia's war machine never stops. Their factories are pumping out artillery shells 5 times faster than Ukraine can stockpile them. While Ukraine begs for more supplies, Russia is getting truckloads of weapons from North Korea and Iran. Russian artillery is raining down non-stop, while Ukrainian soldiers are being told to ration ammo because there's no guarantee when the next shipment will come. Some frontline units are down to just a few shells a day, while Russian forces fire without hesitation. And then there's manpower. Russia doesn't care how many soldiers it loses. They throw wave after wave of troops into battle, grinding down Ukrainian defenses with sheer numbers. Meanwhile, Europe is stepping up. But is it enough to save Ukraine? That's the million-dollar question. On paper, Europe has poured in more money than the U.S., $138.7 billion compared to America's $119.7 billion. But money doesn't win wars. Firepower does. And here's the catch. Europe's aid is spread over time, while U.S. support was the backbone of Ukraine's military. The game-changing weapons? Abrams tanks, HIMARS, Patriot missiles, gone. The UK and Germany are Ukraine's biggest European allies, but they simply don't have the firepower to replace what America pulled out. Britain just threw in another $2.8 billion, but that's a drop in the ocean compared to what Ukraine actually needs. Germany has been hesitant from the start, dragging its feet on tank deliveries, too worried about poking the Russian bear. Some European leaders are now considering sending troops into Ukraine, but only after the war ends. What good is that if Ukraine collapses before then? Kyiv doesn't need promises for the future. It needs weapons and soldiers now. And here's the real problem. Europe is facing its own crises. Economies are struggling, elections are shifting political landscapes, and public support for Ukraine is fading fast. Many European nations are nervous about escalating tensions with Russia. Some are even questioning whether it's worth the risk. Could Zelensky cave into Putin's demands, or will Ukraine find a miracle turnaround? Crazy times ahead? So comment your thoughts below, smash like, subscribe, and let's see where this goes.